Welcome back to the Steps to Writing Like a Pro with me, Mary Harelkin Bishop. We have already talked about step one, which is ideas, and where do you get your ideas from, and what to do when you have too many ideas to use all at the same time. We talked last time about step two and thinking and daydreaming, and this is just a little review here. We talked about you have to think about your characters, you have to think about the problem of your story, you have to think about the action of your story, and you have to think about how you're going to start your story so that it excites your readers and interests them, what's going to happen in the middle, how are you going to end your story and tie everything up, your setting and how important that is, and also the genre, what kind of story you're writing. Today, this is going to be step two, thinking and daydreaming, but expanding that idea. And so what I thought I would do today is walk you through what my brain does when I get a really great idea. And so the first thing that happens to me very often is I see a picture in my head. I think a lot visually, and so pictures often speak to me. And so I'm going to talk about tunnels of time. And so I'm going to talk about tunnels of time today and walk you through what happened to me and how I thought about my story and daydreamed and then got down to writing it. And so just a little recap for those of you who haven't read it. Tunnels of Time is about the main character, Andrea, who is 13 years old. And at the start of the story, she's on her way to Moose Jaw to be involved in a family wedding. And Andrea has a chip on her shoulder at that time, meaning she didn't have a very good attitude. She was kind of in a bad mood because she was missing a class bike trip to the mountains. So would you rather be in a family wedding or go on a mountain bike trip with your class? Obviously, Andrea was upset about the wedding. She really wanted to go with her class. So she's got a bit of a chip on her shoulder, and she gets ready to meet her family in the basement of a restaurant, and it was a rehearsal dinner, and there is where she goes back in time. So it turns out to be she has to time travel to the 1920s, and that's really where all the excitement happens. And so for me, how this story came to be was my family and I went to the tunnels and saw the tunnels in Moose Jaw, and during the third time that we were going through those tunnels, I got an idea in my head, and I saw two kids in my head running through the tunnels, and they were scared. Who do you think those two kids turned out to be? Well, you're right if you guessed one of them was Andrea, and the other one was named Vance. That was the start of my story, and I know I have a good story in my head if the picture stays with me and my brain starts asking questions. And so my brain, the very first question it said is, who are these kids? Then the second question it said is, what are they doing here in the tunnels? And then the third question my brain asked is, what does it feel like to be in the tunnels? So the first question, who are these kids, is actually talking about the characters of the story. And so I knew that the story was going to be about a girl and a boy, but originally Andrea's name was going to be Melissa because I really like Melissa. But when she has to disguise herself as a boy, she would have become Mel, and I wasn't really keen on Mel. And so I thought of names that I kind of liked, and I thought of Andy. And then I worked backward from Andy, looked in a bunch of baby name books, and found the name Andrea. And for me, I cannot write my story until I have the right name. And so once I had the right name, Andrea, here is what I did. I made a character web. And this is very important to do when you are first introduced to a new character, introducing yourself even to a new character. So I put her name in the middle of the web, and I said, okay, what is this kid like? Well, first of all, I decided that she was 13. Then I thought about her family, and I decided she had a mom and a dad and a brother, Tony, who was kind of a bratty brother, but she loved him. Can you see already how I'm thinking a lot about Andrea? The other thing I decided was that she came from a really big family. big extended family, which is what the wedding is all about. So she had grandma and grandpas and cousins and aunties and uncles. So she came from a really big family. The other thing I decided about Andrea was that even though she was a girl, she looked a lot like a boy. And that's an important part of my story later on. And as I was thinking more about Andrea, I decided that she had brown eyes and short, spiky, kind of what we'd call dirty blonde hair. And all of this comes into play in the story again. And this is why you're daydreaming too. And then I decided that she was a girl guide. And so as a girl guide, you know, you join a group of girls and you go out and do things like make campfires and learn about first aid and that kind of thing. And the fact that Andrea knows first aid turns out to be really important in the story. So do you see how I have to really get to know my characters? Because here's what happened in the story. As I was fleshing out and daydreaming and thinking about Andrea, I was creating this character because the things here actually work their way into the action of the story or the plot. For instance, the fact that Andrea has a bratty brother younger than her, even though she loves him, is that the point that he causes some trouble and some action and some interest in the story. The fact that she has a big extended family plays a really big part because the wedding she's going to is actually her cousin's wedding. And so that allows for certain things to happen. The fact that she looked like a boy was really important because when she disguises herself as a boy, if she looked too much like a young woman, she wouldn't have been able to get away with this. The fact that she had brown eyes played into the story because all of her family had, most of her family anyway, had blue eyes, and she really wanted the Talbot blue eyes. And so she was envious of some of the people in the story, which also played into the story. Again, the spiky brown hair works with looking like a boy, which works into disguising herself as a boy. And the fact that she was a girl guide and had a first aid badge works into the story when the other main character, Vance, gets hurt. So I want you to take a few minutes. I had asked you last time to think about a story you'd like to write. I want you to take a few minutes right now, make a character bubble about your main character, and see if you can fill in 6 or 8 things that you know about this character. And I'll see you soon. Welcome back. I hope you took some time to flesh out your main character. I only do this with the main characters, and I do spend a lot of time with this, really thinking about my characters. I actually find that if I can't relate to my characters, then my stories aren't very good. I can't actually write it. So moving on to the important things about the story, the setting we talked about in the last video is really important. The setting for my books was set. It had to be Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, and it had to be in the 1920s. So some of the things I had to think about and daydream about when I was planning this story, one thing was, if it's the 1920s, am I going to write the story as a historical fiction in the past where the things that happened in the tunnels happened in the past? Or was I going to do what I did and bring a character from the present time into the past? So one thing I had to think about here was how was I going to get Andrea into the past? So there had to be some kind of a time travel thing happening here. The other thing I really spent a lot of time thinking about was, what if I had made Andrea a character from the 1920s? The reason I chose to have a modern, present-day kid go back to the 1920s is because I thought it added more interest for my readers. My main character could ask questions like, what is going on and where am I and how come they don't have this kind of invention and a cell phone? And so I thought it really added interest to the story to have the character come from the present to go to the past. The other thing that did, as we move on here to talk about the action of the story, is that gave me a really big problem in my story that had to be solved. And the really big problem for Andrea, even though she had lots of other problems that were going on in the story, the really biggest problem was she had to find a way back to the present. I'm now just say back. She had to find a way back. And so throughout the whole story, every once in a while, Andrea is thinking about this and asking about this. And so that becomes a really important part of the story. There were lots of other problems that happened. One of the little problems I talked about was disguising herself as a boy. Another big problem was having to work for Capone. She meets Capone. I guess that's a problem right there, is meeting Capone, but then having to work as a tunnel runner or a tunnel rat, having to figure out what life was like in the 1920s. How do you navigate in those times? So just living in the 1920s, finding a place to sleep and all those things, making some friends actually too. So when we think about the action of the story, a lot of the things that can happen come from, at least the way I write, come from the things that we put here about our main character. So it really helped me, as I talked about before, with disguising herself. If I already knew that she had spiky short hair and that she already looked like a boy. It also helped with the clothes that she was wearing right at the beginning of the story, really helped with the story so that she could look like a boy. And if you go read it, you'll know what I'm talking about. So in terms of the beginning of the story, I wanted something that would really grab my readers and be exciting for them to start. And so at the very beginning of the story, if you read Tunnels of Time, Andrea is on her way to Moose Jaw. And like I said, she's got that chip on her shoulder and she doesn't want to go. And she's having a fight with her parents right at the very beginning. So this is a little look into my brain about how I think and daydream and plan my stories. And I'm going to leave it here for today. What I hope that you will do is continue to flesh out this main character and think about the problem or problems of your story. Think about the action and how you're going to begin it. And when we come back together next time, we'll talk about step 3 and what to do with all this thinking and planning and daydreaming that you've been doing. All right, keep reading, keep writing, and see you soon.